Assalamu alaikum everybody and welcome back to the Y Factor. You're listening to the second part of our, can we call it epic? We can probably call it epic interview with Yassir Morsi. How are you going again, Yassir?
Walaikum salam. I'm not sure about the epic part.
It's pretty long. It's pretty much, I think, one of the longest interviews we've had. We've had a couple of long interviews, but this is probably up there. So I'm just going to give a quick background about where we left off last, if people have not heard it. We left off talking about the relationship between Islam and democracy, and you're criticizing democracy, and you're talking about why Islam is not, held up in a good light in there. So I want to ask you about the relationship between modern Islam and modern democracy, specifically about something you've been talking about lots about the power relationship between the two. Who's in control? Why? And what does that mean?
Well, there's not so much a who as in a group. There is a center of power that privileges certain identities, and the most privileged identity in modernity, at least especially in the West, is the white heterosexual male.
Is that racist? I'm kidding.
Yeah, if you want.
Yeah, I don't care.
Sure. So the closer you share with these identities, the more advantages you get. So if male, for example, you get a lot of advantages that women don't. The closer you are to the normative whiteness, the more advantages you get. And even the way one expresses their sexuality, again, the closer you are. So it's not a case of who, it's a case of centers of power that privileges certain people and disadvantages others. And it's from that power that certain comments, statements become legitimate and others become illegitimate. So, whenever we speak, there's a prevalent set of assumptions about certain topics. We have associations, signs linked to other signs. And Islam very easily associates with what is illiberal, undemocratic, and subsequently inferior, and so forth. Or at the best, at its greatest expression, at least in the Western narrative, is that it is one of the parts of the multicultural tapestry that is celebrated in the West, and its tolerance of all other cultures. So we become a prop in a white fantasy of their own tolerance. That's the best you're going to get. I mean, the idea that it is a competing, parallel, universal truth that is questioning everything from what it means to be political to what it means to be ethical, it's going to be relativized because everything has to fit within the existing parameters of what I will label whiteness.
Yeah, you've spoken a lot about whiteness both online and in person. Do you want to give like a quick rundown on what you believe whiteness actually is?
Yeah, sure. The closest synonym would be privilege, and privilege not just materially, but privileges of trust, privileges of normalcy, privileges of labels, a privilege of knowing that you have the right. I mean, just look at the confidence certain subjects talk about other people. It's like the confidence certain people have about talking about Islam or fiqh or Sharia. They haven't studied the thing, but there's an assumption that I belong into this civilization, can speak about the other, So it's a series of privilege, and they're blinded to it because there's, in a sense, where we are the true bearers of a universality. It's also racial. I'm not going to hide that. It has a historical root in a colonial world or dichotomy between Europe and the rest. It's Europeanness at its heart, and so what we inevitably mean by whiteness is by tracing, I guess, that center circle of privilege that ultimately shapes why you become a migrant, why you become black, brown, red, whatever, exotic, different, why we have to add adjectives and to explain who you are, why we have to put the word Islamic in front of a space, why we have to say Islamic form of governance instead of just governance, Islamic ethics instead of just ethics. So yeah, everything else becomes particularized, and whiteness assumes the position of universality, norms, common sense, and everyone.
How does that affect the modern Islamic community, if you will? So what impact is that currently having on modern Muslims?
Well, if modern Muslims aren't interested in tracing their power, I'm going to be blunt about this. Modern or moderate, whatever we want to call them, or progressive, I think that's what you're alluding to.
I'm alluding to the... No, I think I should be more specific then. I'm alluding to the entire Ummah as a whole. We can talk about the specifics of Muslims in Australia, but what I was alluding to was that... So what you were basically saying is that there's a privilege, and that's pushing some people to the fringes and accepting some others. What impact is that having on the Muslim Ummah at the moment?
Well, it determines what we can say about ourselves, and it determines also, most importantly, how we can criticize. Look, I mean, look at the vast majority of professional Muslims and how they're critical of the war. It's through the human rights, democratic, secular narrative. So there's an irony here. You are strengthening of the very values of the empire, that it's expanded its scope. Yeah, and because you believe it's universal, fine. But if I trusted for a moment that, I'm not saying there's no good argument out there for liberalism or no good argument for human rights. What I'm saying is that I'm taking a guess, and I'll put my hand up, it's an assumption, that the people in our communities that advocate these things haven't had a sustained, and by sustained reading of it, I mean explored the criticisms of it. And I just don't buy it. Some people don't even know how colonialism has affected modernity. They think it's something in the past.
How has it?
Take a look at everything. Look at the land we're on. I mean,
Yeah.
the trade routes, the construction of countries on borders that were fabricated, the currency, the position of dominance in regards to the economy.
But in terms of values, because what you're saying that people criticize the West on their values. I think that's one of the main issues, is that what I think some people are doing is pointing out the hypocrisy in what they're saying. They talk about human rights as a concept, and yet they breach them themselves.
That is precisely the myth, that democracy or human rights or liberalism was never hypocritical. That somehow at one stage it was holistic and capable of doing the things it promised. It has always been the human face and the guise to hide some of the most horrific crimes. Just look at the war on Iraq narrative. Yes, there was oppositional voices. That's the beauty of it. It feigns complexity. But ultimately it was about which version of democracy do we want to belong to. Look at the asylum seeker debate, the boat people. We're talking about whether or not Australia should be compassionate or whether it should be hardline and protect its interests. It's always from this position of paternalism. It's always from this position that who are we as a nation? Who are we, and what does it mean to be human and have human rights and liberalism? The debate always reaffirms these things, and there's always this assumption that somehow we can achieve or strive a non-hypocritical liberalism or non-hypocritical secularism. I guess what I'm asking to you and everybody who advocates is, prove it. I mean, what's the point of saying something is hypocritical? It's always been like that.
But that doesn't change the issue. I mean, I said this to you on Monday, that there's an issue right in front of us. Fine, the basis, the concrete under it is wrong, right? But that doesn't change that there is an issue right in front of you, and you need to articulate it a certain way to get a message across to the people.
Look, if it's strategic, I recognize that. Of course you have to be strategic. All of us have to be that, whether it's in the personal life, university or work or whatnot. What I'm saying to you, it's not strategic. These voices actually believe in it. I don't... Look, there was a debate, and sorry for mentioning a name. There was a debate amongst my friends and others whether or not the likes of Walid Ali truly believed in what he was saying, or whether or not he recognized that it had to be said to give us some breathing space. There's the dispute. I'm of those people who believe that he truly believes in what he's saying.
Why do you say that?
Because it's sustained and it's continuous, and it's.
But why does that negate a strategic approach?
Because if you're strategic in saying, look, I'm going to use democracy or liberalism to give the community breathing space, that's fine. But if you also believe that it's also the solution to your problems, it's no longer strategic, it's ideological. You believe in these values.
I don't think that anyone is saying that democracy is the solution to anything. Really? But what I think, what I think, okay, well, let me not put words in other people's mouths. That's what I believe. Right. I don't believe that democracy is the solution. But what I do believe in is that there is a system in place here and now at the moment. Now, there's no doubt that there's heavy criticism, and you've spoken about it, and I agree with you on the criticism of democracy, that the very ground on which it's standing is not promoting diversity. It's not really promoting multiculturalism. That's right. But that doesn't change what is in front of your face right now. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Let's make a distinction between this system and the symbolic representation of the system. The system is far more complex, diverse, nuanced, and has multiple opportunities of resistance within it, because the system's made up of, if you will, places of ambivalence and various actors, what we're talking about is the symbolic representation of the system, the language we use to say this is the system. That's very narrow. The idea that you could exit or escape the system is in itself fictional. I don't believe that.
I agree.
What I'm asking for, though, is to find new ways to articulate the invisibilities of what the system produces. It's happened time and time again. I mean, just feminists who come out with an argument that patriarchy is at the heart of something have introduced a new language to explain political relationships. The same with race theorists. Whereas we seem to be borrowing, if you will, the existing language. And look, when I say we, I've got to be careful. It's not all. I'm talking about the dominant voice that seems to come out and pop up everywhere, right?
Yeah, I understand.
So it seems to me that, what we mean by system, we just really mean stuff I know, right? Stuff that I've seen other people do, stuff that we should repeat, stuff that sounds common sense.
Fair enough, but I think that in saying that, when I say the system, specifically I'm talking about the relationship between politics and the community, right? So there are some things that, as I've been saying, that there are some issues that whether or not you agree with democracy, disagree with democracy, these kind of high concept ideas are negating the on the ground point. Yeah. So a quick example would probably be that there are young Muslim people that are on drugs. If we maintain a debate and a discussion about governments, policies, politics, and concepts, we're going to be forgetting that there is, a young guy down there.
Of course, Mustafa. Look, every meaningful, mature approach or policy has both a short aim and a long aim. Yeah, the short aim may mean immediate relief to people who need it. No one should say, don't give charity or don't help those on drugs because you're neglecting foreign policy. I mean, that's a ridiculous argument. But there is short and long ambitions. The short ambition may be temporary. It may be a band-aid solution, but it should also be done with a broader, long, sustainable vision of trying to undermine the very structures that bring youth into trouble. I mean, it's not simply about an immediate response, because you can cure as many drug addicts you want. They're being produced more than you can cure. And until you look at the long term, if you will, restructuring of certain issues, you just always be chasing your own tail.
See, I agree, but then this brings us back to a point. I think that there's two kind of distinct paths that some people are taking. There's a path where we are working within, quote unquote, the system. I know you've broken that up, but you like to work within the relationship between government and the community to achieve both short-term and long-term change. That is to achieve. Let me make my point. I know you want to hit me, but between
not just one.
Basically trying to achieve accountability and trying to receive representation in these short broken systems, versus people that are saying that we need to basically, what you're saying, undermine the system and somehow, well, you tell me, are you trying to break it up? Are you trying to get out of it? Are you trying to, how do you plan to change it from the outside?
I'm not sure we could undermine something. Well, the point is to recognize it first and foremost and reshape it. It's
But how can you reshape it from the outside?
There is no outside. The point of a critic is to assume a position of outside. That's not to say that you really are outside. It's because if you don't assume that position of outside, you subsequently have no place to critique it, right? So, and again, that's mythical. I totally agree with that. My persona as that which is outside the system is almost hilarious when you look at the fact that I belong to academia.
Oh, I know.
Belong to academia and spend the majority of my time on Facebook. I mean, how first world do you want to get, right?
Yeah.
But the position is to assume a politics of outside, right? Yeah. I'm skeptical of anybody who assumes they've done it, at least in the West. And there are positions of inferiority that, put it this way, I think the system spat out the Muslim identity post-September 11, and a bunch of Muslims tried to get back in the system. What I'm trying to say is that place where they placed us on the fringe has barakah, because now you can have a position to interpret from the outside. You're the demonized, fringed figure. Use that positionality to explain, if you will, the cracks in the system. Stop trying to be so normative about it.
But explaining the cracks in the system won't fix the cracks in the system.
Okay, that's not the point of whether it will fix it. The point is to be aware of the terrain upon which you engage your politics in. Otherwise, you might just be adding more cracks.
Okay,
No, this is good,
let's.
yeah.
Sorry, I'm really sorry. I'm cutting it. I'm being very annoying. But hypothetically, we understand the cracks in the system. Now what?
You won't know that until you understand it, man. Like,
Then how do you know? How are you sure that some people within this quote unquote system don't know that?
well, let's get the within part. First of all, I'll answer your question eventually. I just want to go back because I think there's an assumption here that people make a choice between being domestic or being foreign or being broad or being narrow. Yes, I understand there's big issues, but I want to fix the kid on the street. I want to alleviate domestic. Look, this is ideological as much as it's anything. Mostly because people cannot imagine an alternative. Yeah, and above all, it's given that sense of, you know, I have my feet on the ground. I'm practical. I'm pragmatic. I want instant solutions. The idea that it's a strategic, pragmatic choice between one or the other, I don't buy it. It's ideological. We are constantly being told to improve the conditions of the state. The church, for example, does more than the government in regards to alleviating poverty. Okay, it's not that simple to say that, you know, some people want to work within the system. Some people recognize no other way to work. And so on one level, when you ask me what are the cracks, is to make visible that there are ways to imagine alternatives. Now, whether those alternatives are meaningful, whether I fail, whether we can, whether we don't attribute cracks or whatnot, it seems to me a beneficial project. That is to say, highlight particularities and problems, and let's see where it takes us. I'm not one for solutions, Mustafa. I've said that time and time again. I'm just one for expressing positionalities. I'm not one to say there is an A to Z formula on how to improve things. That's ludicrous.
So can I take it that you're implying that both positions, not necessarily parts, both positions are important to the overall progress of the community?
I'll try and simplify it in the sense for
Go
my
complex, go
own
complex.
for my own sake. You know, I'll go back to that statement, and I know it's very Socratic and somewhat Islamic as well, but I don't want to make claims to that. It's just important that we know our terrain. And I guess that's all I'm saying. I'm not interested in claiming that, look, in politics there is no solutions in that sense. There's just winners and losers. And it seems to me that there's a pattern of certain winners and a pattern of certain losers. And what you need to do is condition yourself to be able to do what you can in the best way you can to make sure that you, your community, and the less protected in society aren't always the losers. There is no solution in that sense. It's a constant and perpetual fight. So, yeah, sure, highlighting the cracks in the system in itself is no solution, but it may may open vistas or opportunities to create different forms of resistance, different forms of, you know, activities. It's not a solution itself. Otherwise, academics would be global heroes, and then far from it.
Well, they were at one point, as we were discussing this today. But look, okay, can we conclude that, and it's not saying that we're concluding now, but that that both positions are needed. That you need to point out the cracks in the system, but you also need people within the system to be able to exploit that.
Absolutely, both positions are needed, of course. But I will say this: those who do the kind of on the ground work, grassroots work, they're equally as ideological. I don't believe they have a scorn. Some of them, not all, they have a dismissal of those who focus on foreign policy, or they kind of roll their eyes a little, you know, at the idea that we should look for alternative systems, alternative thoughts. They're like, you guys are crazy. You guys are all the way over there. You're conspiratorial. So yeah, we should have both, but let's not claim that it's just one side criticizing another. It's both sides criticizing each other. And, you know, okay, it's important to focus on the immediate, but my point was the immediate has to be focused within an overall picture of a long-term and viable solution. And that's not really occurring with many of these grassroots. The other thing I want to say is, dude, spare me, okay? Half this stuff, the Muslim question is $1 billion global industry, and it's made a massive amount of careers, okay? It's people have come out of all pockets to try and grab some of that funding, some of that cash, some of that heroic spirit of helping the poor. It's not as simple as one side trying to focus on international, one side trying to focus on the domestic. It's just the way it's been structured. Don't focus on the international or the global or the broader picture, because then you become, if you will, a critic of the state rather than a worker of the state.
So, okay. So how should we become more critical.
Tend to be both. Look, I'm strategic all the time. I mean, I don't walk into work and say, down with academia. I mean, it's ridiculous, yeah? But I'm aware of its limitations. I'm aware of what I can and cannot say. And that's what I say, bring it down. If I trust these guys are strategic, I admire them. But they're not. And I don't think they can convince me they are when they continually repeat, both in private, public, and social conversations, that democracy and human rights and liberalism is the solution. You know what? I'll put it out there. I'll put my hand up. If they can convince me, I'm a willing listener. Let them have a debate with colonial critics. Let them have a debate with radical feminists. Let them have a constant debate instead of just assuming every opponent you have is conspiratorial and crazy. Let them advocate your Islamic form of democracy and liberalism, or your Islamic positivism. We should have a positive attitude. Advocate it in the exact space where you have a critic that can oppose you. And let's see, if you win the debate, ahlan wa sahlan, I'll be the first to convert.
Okay, but I still think that that there are people that are not as naive as you make them out to be. That they are just promoting ideas of Islamic positivism and just kind of saying we need to be good people. Good. That's not really. That's kind of breaking down what they have to say to a simple concept. I'm talking from personal experience as well. I've been in the community for a bit, and I know some of these people, and I think that there is to say that there's no strategic thinking at all would be very naive. No one in the public sphere is an idiot. There are some, Tony Abbott being one, that are idiots, but sorry, and excuse my language, of course, but not everyone is like that. You know, people are thoughtful in their positions.
Yeah, I don't think they're idiots either. I should say it like this. Look, I've had certain discussions with opponents, very rare because they don't like it, and I know they know more, which is tragic. I know they know a lot more about racism than they say. My point is not about what you truly know or what you truly understand. My point is that when you come out in the public and when you create these projects, they're very narrow. They don't seemingly express a long-term strategy. You may know everything. You may know more than the majority of critics about colonial relations. I just do not see it influence, shape your rhetoric, your politics. And I'm not talking about you specifically. I don't see it. And because I don't see it, you create opponents to say you're lacking something. And it's fine to say, well, dear opponent, you should come closer and have a look. No, I mean, it's your product, it's your brand. You should at least hint it. You should at least give some type of suggestion that it's not just something you beyond in front of your noses. It's a broader picture.
Yeah. Now, the issue with that is that you will have, I'm not saying you yourself, but yes, you, the critics will come out and basically thrash any idea that is not in line with their own thinking structure, if you will. The problem is that we have, I believe, is that there's a environment of disagreement that leads to how I could say this violent disagreement. It's not really violent. It's more like aggressive disagreement. Do you know where I'm coming from? That the criticisms are so harsh at times and so out of line. It's either because A, somebody's trying to push their own agenda in opposition to what is being said, or B, that they're just aggressive. They're just being aggressive in their approach. But what that is doing is discouraging people from revealing long-term.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's what. It's creating an environment. So basically, what I'm referring to is the online space in which people have jumped on board. An online space allows anyone to say whatever they want, however much they want. So it provided space for people to criticize without any real engagement with the ideas. Why? Well, I mean, as you explained, you have your reasons to criticize. You believe this and you believe that. But some people are criticizing because they want to push their own alternative.
I can only speak on my behalf. I get what you're saying, and I will say this in agreement with you. If you like, the Muslim public debate and dispute is very, very unhealthy. Yeah, that may be because the conversation isn't always about us. It's about we often speak through the media, speak through government. In a sense, we're always responding to whatever agenda has been set of the day. You know, something doesn't.
I don't think that's necessarily true. I think there are people that are proactively moving forward.
No, I'm not saying that there's an absence of people proactively moving forward.
Yeah.
I'm saying, look, we don't really set the agenda of our conversation all the time. So, for example, an event happens that's all over the media, and the next thing you do, we're all talking about it, yeah?
Yeah.
So we're not really in charge of the way our narrative moves. We have some autonomy and
understand, yeah.
agency. Now, I agree with you, so in many cases the conversation's unhealthy, partly because of our lack of quote-unquote, wait for it, adab, yeah?
Wow, what is this campaign against adab? You're just evil. No, I'm kidding.
It's
I
a
understand.
political tool to silence, man.
Well, just like disagreement is. You know, it's the same kind of category.
Yeah, fair enough. But I'm only going to talk about myself here as a critic. I'm not going to sit here and claim that everything I've done has been good or meaningful and has a hidden wisdom behind it that I'm proud of. It's not true. I react in certain ways. I'm a politicized subject that wants to be political, and sometimes I'm not always in control of the message. Fine. But at the same time, look, I think there is a tendency from many people to privilege message over tone, which is, okay, I get it, but then you're assuming that tone is not political in itself. Anger is a political registry. Frustration is a political registry. The idea that it should be removed and we should speak in a very polite, monotone tone of respect and whatnot. Okay, it's an aspiration, it's an ideal. But when you have a broken world, a broken community, there are going to be angry voices that cannot articulate themselves in this highfalutin, well-established adab. It's not likely because our kids have grown up, if you will, on the fringes of society. They only know how to express their dissent through swearing, through overplaying their masculinity. That's one issue.
Overplaying their masculinity.
No, it's true.
That.
It's true. Like, it's all about winning the debate, smashing your opponent. It's a very masculine thing, right?
Yeah.
It's about, winning the war. There's always this analogy of a war, okay? That's one thing. So I don't like this dismissal of form, this dismissal of tone, because tone is... Now, I'll tell you, I put on a persona at times, politically, not because I so wholeheartedly agree with these values that I'm defending, because I believe their place in the conversation is important. For the first half of my quote-unquote Facebook career, I was a defender of Hizb ut-Tahrir. Why? Because I did not want them to be excluded from the conversation. I'll tell you now, I have very little in common from what I know of their literature with their political view. I could easily critique it as a symptom of colonial thought. But they're important to the debate. They're important. And I think that's what I was defending. And there was a hell of a lot of Islamophobia directed towards them by other Muslims. And so in many cases, yeah, okay, you're right. People are vitriol, they're aggressive and whatnot, and it's your choice to engage. But I think if we're truly serious about creating a diverse conversation, our kind of high aspirations of perfect and well-mannered, no, maybe not perfect, but well-mannered speech has to be lowered a bit, because people are angry, and anger is also a political registry.
As Y Factor admin, I take your criticism on board. We have that kind of stock message we send out. We accept your feedback. Thank you very much. I'll send that to you. But that's a good point. I think that not a lot of people make that point. And I think that in my time as a Y Factor admin, I've noticed that, and that by just adhering to that adab principle, you privilege certain speakers over others.
Of course you do. And I'll tell you now, a lot of people that agree with me or like my position, it's not because they fully understand what I'm saying. It's because they recognize I'm oppositional. They recognize I'm angry at certain media spokespeople. And that anger, there's this, look, the amount of emails and feedback I got is, Jazakallah khair, akhi, barakallah feek. Oh my God, you're using their language against them for the first time. There was this class issue. There was this assumption, and I will outline my own assumptions by saying this. There was assumption that by these professional Muslims that they were the leading elite who were educated and knew the law and knew democracy, and it kind of mirrored the classist breakdown, and these other brothers didn't know the system properly. These other sisters were caught up and brainwashed, and then you get the Melbourne monsters. Is that what you call them?
The Melbourne gaggle. No, what did I say? Melbourne murder.
Yeah, Melbourne murder, and we know democracy better than they do. And we know the language better than they do. And we know the vocabulary better than they do. And it offsets them. And I think when people come out and we're as angry as those on the fringes, but we use the language that the quote-unquote educated elite use, that creates a whole new political dynamic. And I just don't think that it should be dismissed because I'm not saying, I understand your point of view and I recognize your version of truth. No, I disagree wholeheartedly. And I see you as a subject totally blinded to the power that first positioned you as a spokesperson who knows very little other than the liberalism that weaned you into that position. And that's why I'm critical of moderate Islam.
Now, it's really unfortunate that you said that now, because we're at the end of our epic interview. But I mean, we can probably touch upon it. Would you like to explain to us your own opinion on what is a moderate narrative?
Okay, I'll try use an analogy to
Make it like a quick summary.
how quick? 30 seconds?
No, go for it.
I'll use a quick analogy, and it's a ridiculous analogy because I'm finding it difficult to continue to express this point. Let's just say that the Muslim community is a bunch of people surrounded around a dry well, okay? It's a lack in water. And let's say this dry well or this lack represents our position today. We're lacking something. We're constantly speaking about something that is missing and the reason why we're not successful, the reason why we're not strong. So you get the Hizb ut-Tahrir say what's lacking is the Khalifa. You get maybe the Salafi who says what's lacking is our return to the first three generation. The traditional Muslim or the Sufi say what's lacking is the link and the chain that brings us back to our tradition. What I'm saying is what moderate Muslims say is lacking, whether they realize it or not, is an enlightenment language of self-criticality, of rationality and whatnot. That's not to say that none of these three other ones, okay, don't advocate rationality, but they stress on very democratic liberal ethoses as the thing that's lacking. Yeah, and that's how I interpret them. Now they're not conscious to it. That's why we come up with the word maftoon, because it's an articulation of an unconscious fitna that we've all absorbed, but some champion it and some don't. So to answer your question, how I see moderate Islam, it is an Islam that is overly influenced by a hegemony, and in many cases people are unaware of it, and it advocates a distance as well from quote unquote bad Muslims. And that's the key point that I want to say. Its Geist, its spirit is really just a negation. I am not the Taliban. That's really how it got placed in the public, psyche. On top of all of that, and I'll conclude with this because I know I'm running out of time, it's also a government and certain think tanks' agenda to promote a certain version of Islam that's removing from its heart any malignant or oppositional view to that kind of enlightenment, democratic, liberal West.
That's a good way to end it. Now, I'd just like to provide my own opinion on that. I think that
one fact always has to end. There's no final word. Yeah.
I mean, well, it is our show, is it not? I mean,
I'm joking with you.
Would you like to take on?
Can I just give a quick plug to Samara if you want true Islamic hardcore debate? You know which group to join, yeah?
What do you mean by Islamic debate? Do you really want to go there, Yassir? Come on. I haven't been on there. I haven't been thrashing all of you guys. But no, I'm kidding. I do want to make a point on that. I just think that my own opinion of that is that, yes, absolutely, you'd be naive to think that the government is not trying to control certain voices and trying to push certain agendas. But I also think that you'd be naive to just believe in standing on the fringes and criticizing instead of engaging with these government ideas and saying, wait, maybe we should shape them to this. And maybe we should use these guys for a certain, a certain way. Now, I know some people disagree, and I know, yes, you will have something to say on that, but unfortunately, we are out of time. What I would like to invite is every single person who's listening in who has an opinion on what Yassir has said and what I have said to comment. So it will be split into two parts. This will be the second part. You can be the first part. So there'll be, people will have an opportunity to engage with each of the ideas separately, and criticize away, call me what you want to call me, call Yassir what you want to call him, that's fine. But we do encourage everyone to engage with the ideas. So Jazakallah khairan, Yassir, for coming down and taking part in this interview. And we thank you from the Y Factor. You're listening to Y Factor on 87.6 FM.
Thanks, bro.
Call Yassir whenever you want.